I'd like to invite to the stage next my colleague and partner in crime, Dr. Natasha Schaefer-Sali, and my other partner in crime, Dr. Sara Jahnke, as we begin our topic on risk factors for cancer in the fire service. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sali and Dr. Jahnke.
Good morning, everyone. So we are very excited to start this off this morning with our first topic of modifiable risk factors. I have the great privilege and honor to introduce our first speaker, my colleague and friend, Dr. Sara Jahnke. Sara is the director and a senior scientist at the Center for Fire, Rescue, and EMS Health Research at the National Development and Research Institute. With over a decade of research experience on firefighter health, Dr. Jahnke has been the principal investigator on 10 national studies as well as dozens of studies as co-investigator. Her work has focused on a range of health concerns, including the health of female firefighters, behavioral health, risk of injury, cancer, cardiovascular risk factors, and substance abuse, with funding from Assistance to Firefighters Grants R&D Program and the National Institute of Health and other foundations. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Jahnke.
All right, and this is the clicker, right? No? All right, got this. I am so excited to be here, and I'm even more excited to see a room full of people who are also excited to be here and to hear me talk about things like diet and exercise. Are you expecting a little more enthusiasm? Thank you from the back of the room. No, all right, so I know there was some self-disclosure this morning, so I'm going to do a little bit too, because I kind of struggled with this presentation, and I put together one that I haven't put together before in a way I haven't put together before. I have been doing, like Natasha said, firefighter health research for over a decade, and I'm really good at telling you really bad news about how firefighting is bad for your health. So we've spent a decade documenting rates of obesity and alcohol use, and I'm really good at doing that, but I do think, and seems to be the theme for the day, which was unintentional, but I think speaks volumes, the action steps. So what do we do about it? And I'm going to talk a little bit about the rates of the less sexy stuff that you can do to avoid cancer, but these are the things that I really think we need to take back to the department. In addition to, absolutely, decon and clean gear and all those types of things are important, but we know that cancer in firefighters is about, 9 to 14%, depending on the study and what rate you're looking at. If you look at the impact of obesity or substance use on top of that, it's basically exponential. And so I think it's even more important for firefighters to pay attention to their modifiable risk factors than it is for the general population, because you're already at an increased risk. So then I'm thinking, okay, so now I have to give an enthusiastic, let's talk about what you just ate for breakfast speech. At least I'm not right before lunch. Thank you. I have been presenting, FRC has been putting on cancer seminars around the country, and I present often with Bruce from O2X. And so they have this, their tagline is the 1% better. And so we do this great presentation when we're there together, where I talk about all the bad news, and he's like, yeah, and you can do this, this, and this. Bruce is special ops, military. He has all these sports ball references to the game with the innings, and there's that one guy. I tried to do it one time with his slides, and it was horrible. I'm like, so this guy that played baseball, that's the one with the innings, and I couldn't sell it. And so I'm like, okay, I got it. I love the concept of 1%, but I don't deliver you'll be shocked to know I don't deliver a special ops male who knows what baseball and football and those things are. So I'm thinking okay, but I love the idea, and where do I connect with this? And I had this aha moment. I went to, anyone in the crowd know who Chris Nikic is? Yes? At least one. Anyone else? All right, so we have two. We should talk later, because this guy's my hero now. So Chris is in the Guinness Book of World Records for being the only person with Down syndrome to ever complete the Ironman competition. I know this because, and pretty much every parent in the special needs community knows this, because this is such a monumental, when we talk about it being more challenging for someone to be healthy, than the general population, than the average Joe walking, or Joette walking down the street. Down syndrome is like the perfect example of this. So I have a 5-year-old who has Down syndrome, and let me tell you, everything about Down syndrome, similar to everything about firefighting, makes it more challenging. That's the case with Down syndrome, right? So there's like, there's lower muscle tone, so my son's 5, and he's still nonverbal. Teaching him to jump with both feet, I didn't even know it was like an important milestone, took 2 years. And my husband, thousands of like squatting, jumping. My son can now jump. And he gets out of bed jumping, like jumps down the hallway because he's so proud of himself for being able to do this. So the fact that Chris was able to complete the Ironman is phenomenal. And so and his tagline is 1%. So my husband and I are watching this, and me and like all of our Down syndrome community friends are all watching Chris like cross the finish line at the Ironman all day long. My husband's crying. My son walks up to him and just pats him on the back and gives him a hug. So I told my husband, I'm like, this is what I connect to. So this is where I'm going to do, like, if Chris can do this, the fire service can do this. And I said, you know, I'm gonna say he's the only person and the only person with Down syndrome. And he goes, whoa. You need to say the first person with Down syndrome. And I was like, God, here we go. So now my 5-year-old's now training for the Ironman. But yeah, I think his video is gonna play. And I know it takes a minute, but I think it's oh, can we get the video to play? Do we know? Do you know if it'll, she said it would work? Well, I could reenact it for you in the meantime. We'll find out. Anyway, so his speech, which I'm gonna not do nearly as well as he did it, he talks about that it's 1% better every day. He says, you know, people ask me, how did you do this? Because he, a couple of years ago, was obese, pretty sedentary, and now he's finishing the Ironman. And it's just a story of triumph and overcoming. So he says, and that's what he says, is he said, I just did 1%. Every day I did 1% better than the day I did before. And so when I like step back and look at it in the whole grand scheme of things, if Chris Nikich, who has Down syndrome, who has low muscle tone, can finish an Ironman, like then we as the fire service can figure this out, right? So there are all these challenges. We can still do it. So I'm gonna give you my top 8 things to do. I was going to do top 10, but I feel like that's totally overdone. I will highly recommend that you YouTube the video of his speech because it's him receiving the ESPY award, and it's like one of the most motivational things I've ever seen in my life. So my top 8 things to do, 10's overdone, 5 didn't seem like enough. So 8 it is. And I did kind of put these in order based on like the impact of what you see with the relative risk. My number 1 is don't use tobacco. And notice I did not say no smoking because you absolutely should not smoke. But also we know that rates of smoking in the fire service are relatively low compared to other populations, compared to the military, compared to like, it's not bad. Now you look at smokeless tobacco use, and granted the risks are a little bit different, the cancers that are associated are a little bit different, but smokeless tobacco use is second to only like 1 or 2 other occupations, which I don't think is something that we should be celebrating, the success in that area, but smokeless tobacco too. So a lot of departments are doing, you know, tobacco-free policies, but they focus on smoking. Make sure that those policies and the cessation programs focus also on smokeless when you're out and working with your departments. We have, actually one of my colleagues just was funded on a project, or just finished up a project from American Cancer Society where they developed a smokeless tobacco intervention. So if you need that, I'm sure that my contact information is somewhere and we can get it to you. We do know, I mean, like, this is Public Health 101, or anyone who's ever watched anything on tobacco. Tobacco's the leading cause of cancer and death from cancer. So don't do that, and make sure that the people around you don't do that. See, that one's pretty easy, right? So I don't even need like 1%, unless, and I should give the caveat too that I'm gonna talk a lot about doing 1% better, but if you're a person, or you've got some folks who are like, I'm all in on this health and wellness thing, definitely do that. If you are at that point in your life, if someone else in your department's at the point in their life where they want to make a big change, go for it, plan for it. The rest of us humans, mere mortals, let's focus on the 1% that we can do. So tobacco, cut back, and then just cut it all the way out. But the number 2 thing, and I originally put this at the bottom until I started really looking at like the impact and the overall risk that struggling with sleep and not getting enough sleep has on health. Now, thank you for John for yawning just then to be descriptive and to give everyone a sense. So there's, and I do think some of the research on sleep in the fire service is definitely emerging. It's a new area, but because we see the impact of it so significant. I mean, it's been World Health Organization just classified it as a probable carcinogen shift work. So if you ever need to be scared into sleeping better, read the book Why We Sleep. Main author is Walker, and he's out of California. It's the best book, and it will make you rethink your sleep. So his example is this. Felix Baumgartner, another Guinness Book of World Records. I'm a big fan of that today. This guy went 128,000 feet into the air in a hot air balloon, or whatever that is, wearing a spacesuit, stood atop a ladder because 128,006 feet was better, free fell to Earth at 843 miles per hour and created a sonic boom with his body. So that's in the Guinness Book of World Records. Like, to me, probably the stupidest thing you could do, right? Guess what's not in the Guinness Book of World Records? Going the longest without sleep, because it's so dangerous. So if you think about this is not too dangerous, but going without sleep the longest, like they just can't take the liability of that. I think that says something about the importance of sleep. And when you think about sleep, when we say not enough sleep, like how many people in the room sleep on average less than 5 hours a night? How about 6 to 7? 7 to 8? So sleep is, you see the impacts even if you sleep a few nights less than like a 7 or 8 hour, right? So then think about in the fire service, like obviously, and that's part of the challenge is that all the stuff that we've done in the fire service and the reports and all those types of things that are looking at shift work haven't necessarily been looking at firefighter health. It's been looking at other occupations. And you can't, like, someone has to go, right? When grandma falls off the bed in the middle of the night, someone has to show up for that. So I think the research on that is like, then what do you do if you know that you're gonna have to be up? It means that you need to pay better attention to your sleep. So my challenge with that would be, how can you improve your sleep? How can you prioritize that? Because it does impact everything else. All the other health risk factors and modifiable risk factors I'm going to talk about next, sleep makes it worse. All right, number 3, connect. And I don't mean this in the sense of the internet, social media, not necessarily. This is in terms of talking about behavioral health. And I know Dr. Edwards did his talk yesterday on behavioral health, and I would say that was fantastic, right? Anyone that saw it, loved it? Yeah. I would like to apologize to anyone who's ever had to listen to one of my talks on behavioral health, because now I realize it sucks compared to his. But I think the point of his talk was, like, you've got to deal with this stuff, right? Because it's in there, you've experienced it. Whether the connection for you is talking to a spouse or a colleague, it's important to be connected, right? And so we know resilience is built by those social connections. So connect with people, connect with people. When you look at firefighter behavioral health and what we see with the fire service, it's not one thing, right? So it's the chronic repeated exposure to the trauma. It's going to everybody's worst day. Some days it's gonna bother you, some days it's not, most days it's not, but that does take its toll. There's also the acute exposures. So the, like he talked about yesterday, like the things that you punch into your Rolodex, those really like traumatic experiences too. There's environmental exposures, there's the home life stressors. There's the fact that when you have maybe picked a dead baby up off the ground, forgetting the milk isn't that big of a deal to you, whereas to your spouse, it's an example of everything that's wrong with our relationship, right? So I think you called it your burnout-o-meter. I called it my give-a-shit meter. Like you just have less to give. So I think that does impact it. There's also, on the other side of that, no surprise that we see higher rates of things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, disease or injury, depending on the conversation you're having, suicidal ideation, and substance use and abuse, right? So it's not shocking that you see those as outcomes when people aren't dealing with it, when they aren't kind of facing and acknowledging and giving reverence to the fact that they're experiencing some pretty traumatic things. Also, cancer and cardiovascular disease. Both the fact that behavioral health plays into those and your risk factors for those, and the fact that I can't imagine that we just spent 2 days telling you, you're all gonna die from cancer. And that's not a little bit stressful, right? Like there's a lot going on there. So not surprising there. On the other side of that, we see resilience and post-traumatic growth. Like there are a lot of, the fact that more of the folks in this room are not curled up in the fetal position in the corner, given all the stuff that you probably saw in the last month, speaks to the fact that the fire service is resilient, right? It's not, everything you see is not gonna cause you to crumble, but you have to respect that there might be that thing that makes you crumble. And then the other side of that, and overlaying that, underlaying that, infiltrated in all of it, is the fact that shift work, sleep and circadian rhythm disruption is it's just gonna be a challenge. And it's just something we have to deal with, right? And we have to figure out ways to lessen the impact of that as much as possible. So on the connect, I would say, what's the 1%? And challenge yourselves, challenge your department to do 1% better on that, right? To do 1% more being connected with other folks, whether it's just reaching out to someone, reaching out to a friend, grabbing an extra cup of coffee and sitting down with someone. Be willing to maybe like peel back the layers just a tiny bit to talk about what's going on. It doesn't have to be like a sit down and like, let's sing Kumbaya and talk about all my deepest fears. It can just be a, hey, how are you doing? Or, God, it was rough, like it's a little bit rough today. So 1% on that, we can do it. Number 4, eat things you recognize. Nutrition. I hate talking about nutrition, and I know the next talk is on nutrition, so I'll just skip this one. Just kidding. No, I do think that this is key, because when we look at obesity and the fire service, like I said, there's so many things about the fire service that really pull for unhealthy behaviors. But when you look at, and pull for obesity, shift work being one of them. If you look at cancers associated with overweight and obesity, there are a number of them that are significantly related. You'll see, too, that a lot of those are ones that in those studies that we've been referencing about increased rates of cancer are the same ones that are increased with firefighting. So then think about, you overlay both of those, right? So a firefighter, you've got all these exposures, and you're struggling with obesity because of all these occupationally relevant reasons. It's a lot. But to give you an example of what that looks like kidney cancer, so Daniel's study found kidney cancer 27% higher in firefighters. If you look at not studies of firefighters, but just overweight and obesity, overweight 28% higher, obesity 77% higher. You look at that number for things like esophageal cancer, ugh. Okay, so now we need to really talk about nutrition. And so when I say eat what things you recognize, that whole adage of like, eat the outside of the, well, that doesn't sound right, but you know what I mean. Shop the outside of the grocery store. Those Whole Foods, like if you pull up what you're having for dinner and you turn the label around, first of all, if it has a label, that might be a problem, because things like bananas and apples don't have labels. But if you turn that thing around and you look at the label and you can't pronounce the words, that's probably not something you want to eat. If you want, I have another talk where I talk about some of the food additives I've learned about, and it's not pretty. Like some of the stuff that is put in food, you do not want to be ingesting. I will give one example because this always, because I found it so unbelievable. But if you like Hot Pockets, anyone, you should leave now. Not because I don't want you here, just leave for a second because I will ruin Hot Pockets for you. I've not had a Hot Pocket since I learned this tidbit of information. So Susie Day, she's worked on a project with us. She's down in Texas, and she now does the R&D grants. And so we're talking about nutrition, and we're doing these 24-hour food recalls for our Fuel to Fight study. And we're talking about like how to measure all this. And she goes, well, she's food additives, and you never know what you're getting. And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, well, it's like Hot Pockets. And I'm like, oh my God, I love those things. And she goes, well, it's like the protein that's in there is human hair. And I was like, you are so full of it. You just don't want me to eat Hot Pockets. So I looked it up. It was on the internet, so I know it's true. But there are proteins that are derived from human hair that are added to to foods to up the protein intake in it. Now, it's not actually like bioavailable for your body, but when you look at the back of the Hot Pocket, but it doesn't say human hair. It says a word I can't pronounce. So really thinking about eating whole foods. Like we could debate should it be Atkins or keto or paleo or Mediterranean? Like, I don't think we need to have that debate unless you really want to dial into a diet and biohack yourself. But again, for the rest of us mere mortals here, let's just focus on eating a little bit better. 1% better today than yesterday. So like eat one bite less of the delicious croissants, and no insult to the caterers because that was an amazing breakfast. But maybe like adding in a little bit of fruit, taking out a little bit of the pastries, right? Tomorrow, not today, but tomorrow. We're starting this. Oh, we're starting this tomorrow, by the way. 1% better tomorrow. But if you think about overall, you think about your risk for obesity, like these are big changes that if you can make 1% better, like this week, let's do 1% better. The week after, we'll do 1% better than that. That we can do, right? That we can all do together. Number 5, move more and better. So whatever that 1%, think about what you're doing today and do 1% better of that tomorrow. If that means walking a little bit tomorrow because you don't usually go out and do a walk, then start with a walk. If it means stretching a little bit, stretch. Now, I will say when I say better, I think we got to pay attention to a few things, form and function. So I know Dan, I don't want to steal his thunder, but let me give a little bit of I'll be like his hype girl, like functional fitness later. Is that what a hype girl does? I don't know. I think I'm supposed to pass out shots or something, but I'm not doing that. Alcohol's next. Not alcohol's next to the presentation. This is getting off track. Let me just take a moment. Dan's going to talk to you about functional fitness, but it is important to think about when you think about workouts. Like when you go to a fire. Now I've never been a firefighter. Grew up in a fire service family. Watched my dad fight fires, but I've never fought a fire myself. But I don't remember it involving a marathon. Now, I'm not saying don't do marathons. I'm just saying think about when you show up to a fire, what that's going to entail, right? It's going to entail short bouts and complex movements with heavy things. So, if you want to do marathons, but also those functional movements, those moving in the ways that you're going to have to move when you're on the fire ground are important things to do. So functional fitness, we actually did a study, one of our studies, we looked at functional training, and in particular with this one, we're asking about high intensity functional training. Where it's like the short bouts and what we found is that the firefighters who engaged in that actually were less likely to be obese, but were twice as likely to meet fitness standards. So that NFPA 12 minimum, they were more likely to reach that. Rethink the way you drink. So I guess I could have made this about like water and hydration. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about alcohol in this instance, although I would also encourage you to rethink the way you drink your water, drink more. Hydration, in terms of hydration, that is a key when we talk about nutrition. I should make sure that we all understand that drinking beer is not hydrating. We're all on the same page? Cool. Rethink your relationship with alcohol, basically. So we know, and I say this from a completely non-judgmental spot, I would like to say that the nerds stayed out longer than the fire service folks at the place we were at for dinner last night, and someone did talk our waitress into a free round of shots. I know. Not mentioning any names. Derek Edwards. But so we know, though, that drinking alcohol is related, especially binge drinking and to excess is related to development of cancer. A couple examples here, 14% higher in the Jalilian study, colon cancer among firefighters, 25% higher for folks who drink 3.5 drinks per day on average. Okay, so and that seems to be the cutoff in most of the studies, is about 3.5 drinks. Now, there's some debate, and like every day there's a new study about like alcohol's really good for you, alcohol's really bad for you. I like the days where they say it's good for you, but I think we need to balance that. But what we do know from the literature is basically binge drinking, so 3.5 drinks or more a day can be bad for your health. Not can be, is bad for your health. Esophageal cancer, again, not to pick on that type of cancer, but 213% higher hazards ratio for folks who are consistently drinking that 3.5 drinks per day of alcohol. Now, the bad news for the fire service is that when we did studies, and this is consistent with other groups that have been around the country asking questions about alcohol use, we did this in surveys, we did it in 24-hour food recalls. On average, when firefighters drink, they drink, I can't make this up, 3.5 drinks when they drink. Now, granted, there's a big range there from people who are drinking a case to people who are not drinking at all. But when firefighters drink, that drink, it's on average 3.5. So, again, I think if I stood up here and said, like, don't ever drink alcohol again, 1, you would not listen to me. 2, you would not listen to me. And 3, I think that's unrealistic to say, oh, just completely cut it, because of the relationship it has to everything else in the fire service, right? To the camaraderie that is around alcohol. We've done whole qualitative studies on it, and there's a lot about just the social lubricant. People feel like they can talk about their feelings more if they're drinking, those types of things, which is why we did shots last night. We were trying to talk feelings, then, yeah. No, I'm lying. But we do need to think, I think it's pretty safe to say that regularly getting intoxicated is not good for your health, but we do see that in the fire service pretty consistently. And I do think when you look at this in terms of all the other things too, right? So obesity, things like that. When we did the nutritional, the 24-hour food recalls, on average, when people drank, they drank a Big Mac's worth of calories in alcohol. Like that's a lot of extra calories on top of the Big Mac and fries you had for dinner, right? If you're drinking. We had one, back to our nutritional epi study, we did this food recall, and I got a phone call from the researcher, and she's like, I think you're screwing these up, which in the research world, like to have screwed up 2 departments worth of 24-hour food recalls is an emergency. So I was like, oh my God, what have I done? So I pull together all my stuff, and she gives me a list of, we schedule a meeting, and she gives me a list of the ones we need to go through, and she's like, I think you're coding alcohol wrong. So I'm like, all right, like this is a big deal, because I know from our previous studies, I'm ready to go. So we get to number 1, and I open it up, and she's like, all right, see on this page 77 of your food recall, where you put a case of beer. And I'm like, I do see that. And she goes, okay, I need you to put how many beers from the case that this firefighter drank, like you just put a case of beer. And I said, well, I wrote it right there, and it says a case of beer. And she goes, Sara, from that, how many did he drink? And I go, a case of beer. Like, I can't be more clear. And she goes, Sara, no one could drink a case of beer in one day. I said, I think that it's not a problem with my data collection skills, it's a problem with your view of what normal drinking in the fire service is skills. Turns out the rest of the food recalls were perfect, and she now understands the fire service in a way she did not before. And so that's part of the problem, right? So the norm in the fire service is that everyone goes out and drinks, right? I was a little bit thrown off last night that there was not like a bar that we all hung out in the hotel, because that's where everyone goes, right? At conferences. Everyone's like, okay, I'll meet you at the Hyatt, I'll meet you at the... But we need to rethink that a little bit. I'm not saying we have to be teetotalers and, when we sing our Kumbaya, we don't have to have tea, but maybe a case of beer is not good. So I think that's where we need to go. Okay, if maybe 1%, like calculate however much you drink and then drink 1% less than that this week, starting tomorrow. And then the next week, 1%, 1%, 1%. So, and my number 7 is use the power of peer pressure. I think what the fire service has done with regard to smoking is the perfect testament to what can be done when the fire service uses peer pressure in a positive way. And you see it, like if you're the one person on the crew, like if your crew's really good at cleaning gear, wash your hood Sunday or whatever it is, and there's one person that doesn't do it, that poor sucker, because everyone else is doing it, so then you have to do it too. So let's just put that on these other modifiable risk factors. Let's make the fire service does this. When we did qualitative work, and this was a decade ago, on tobacco use, we did these focus groups and we talk about, so we'd get to the tobacco section and we were like, okay, let's talk about tobacco use. What's smoking like in this department? If there was one smoker in the room, I felt sorry for even bringing up the question, because everyone in the room would like turn to him and be like, well, this asshole still, da 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 da. And I'm like, I wasn't trying to attack anyone, but the whole movement in that group was like, this is not what we do. Rich Duffy, he was at the union before God was born, I think, and we went in and talked to him about health and wellness, and he gets to the tobacco section, and he's like, the fire service will not smoke. And I'm like, that's, okay, so now we just need to get that energy behind the fire service will talk about their feelings a little bit more in safe spaces and get help when they need to. Now, I get the tagline for that is a little bit more, but I think we can do it, right? The fire service will primarily eat whole foods. You see where I'm kind of like, it's a harder tagline, but we can do it. If we can do it with smoking, we can do it with anything. So use the power of peer pressure, not just for those things, but also we've started looking at things like, and don't roll your eyes when I say this, but issues around inclusion, diversity, and equity. We had a study, thank you for not rolling your eyes. We had a study on looking at women in the fire service, and we looked at women who experienced low, medium, or high rates of discrimination and harassment. And what we found is, because if you look overall at women in the fire service, rates of behavioral health issues are a little bit higher, which I'm like, I've met a lot of women in the fire service, and they tend to be pretty hardcore. Like, when you look at the impact of discrimination and harassment, and I think this is for anyone who's ostracized in the group, right? It doesn't just have to be a female. It's always like that guy or gal. You see a significant impact. So if you take that out, if you take the people who are being treated poorly out, like women are no more or less screwed up than men in the fire service. But if you bring people into the fire service and you treat them poorly, that does have very measurable mental health and physical health impacts. And so that's the other space where I really think we need to start talking about using the peer pressure, understanding that there is an impact of calling out that guy, because it robs them of all the things that are protective about the fire service. So again, let's use positive peer pressure. And we do know that there are a lot of things, like I said, that do work about the fire service: the camaraderie, the dark humor, the social support, that informal debriefing sitting around the kitchen table, the family support, the sharing of experiences, and that fire service identity. Those things are so important, but we can't rob anyone of that, whether it's a female, whether it's an ethnic minority, whether it's an LGBT firefighter, because it has very real impacts, and it has very negative impacts. So I think that's in terms of like health and wellness, and overall, this isn't just for your health, but for their health. We have to start paying attention to this and looking at the real implications of this. And then my final one is breathe. Now, I mean that in the sense of like, don't stop breathing, one, because then you would be dead. But that's not really what the intent of this. It's more, one, mindfulness, breathing, that like square breathing of like breathing in, breathing, holding your breath, breathing out, like slow that down. It has very real and measurable impacts on your health, but also just like, let's take a breath. It's all right. We're gonna all get through this. Like, give yourself a little bit of a break. I know Derek talked yesterday about, like, fire service tends to be very like, okay, we're gonna go in and fix this, and we gotta do this, and we gotta do this. And I think when we talk about modifiable risk factors and the 1%, how we can be 1% better, like, this is an uphill battle, right? But we're gonna do it 1% at a time, starting tomorrow when we're not here. We're gonna do 1% better. We're gonna identify goals. We're gonna go back to our departments and say, hey, how can we get a little bit better? And then, like, let's take a breath. We got this. We got this. It's only taken a decade for me to create a positive, action-oriented presentation. Like, a decade from now, we will totally celebrate this over some tea and kumbaya. Any questions? Everyone's just like, yeah, 1%. We can do this. All right.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing, amazing talk. I want to see if there's any questions coming in from online. They're sitting up here. No, I guess not.
I was so clear. Everyone's like, got it.
Got it, done.